What gave Europeans the right to claim and conquer the world? Subscribe to Supremacy Files, Power, Order, and Control, where we trace how supremacy was constructed, defended, and adapted through history. The mid-1400s marked a turning point. Europe was restless and ambitious. Kingdoms like Portugal and Spain were looking outward, hungry for land, trade, and resources. Technology was shifting. New ships could sail further. Navigational tools made exploration easier, and printing spread ideas faster. But ambition alone wasn't enough. Conquest required authority, and authority had to come from the highest source in Europe, the Church. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued Dum Diversas, a decree granting Portugal the right to invade, conquer, and enslave non-Christians. 3 years later, Romanus Pontifex expanded those rights, authorizing Christian nations to seize lands and treat non-Christians as property. These decrees weren't suggestions. They were law, written and sealed by the papacy. If conquest could be blessed as holy, what limits existed on power? At first, the division was framed as faith, Christian versus non-Christian, but conversion could never guarantee equality. Over time, the line shifted from religion to race. Skin color, ancestry, and blood became the deciding factors of who could claim humanity and who could not. A new category emerged, whiteness, and it was placed firmly at the top. If supremacy can change its definition and survive, was it always designed to adapt? The power of these decrees didn't stop in Portugal. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI issued Caetera, drawing an imaginary line that divided the New World between Spain and Portugal. A year later, the Treaty of Tordesillas adjusted that line slightly to satisfy both kingdoms. With strokes of a pen, entire continents were divided without the consent of those who lived there. What does it mean when millions of people can be erased by a map drawn in Europe? From there, the expansion spread like wildfire. Portugal fortified coastal Africa and began trafficking enslaved people across the Atlantic. Spain launched voyages into the Caribbean, conquering islands and soon entire empires like the Aztecs and Incas. England, before it looked west, tested this same doctrine in Ireland, where Catholic populations were treated as inferior and land was seized under the logic of discovery. The Dutch moved into Indonesia and the Spice Islands. The French advanced into Canada and Africa. Wherever they went, the pattern was the same. Discovery meant ownership, resistance meant rebellion, and conquest was not theft, it was law. If the law itself can declare theft legitimate, what chance does justice have without power? This wasn't only military or legal, it was cultural. Medieval maps labeled lands outside Europe as blank, waiting to be filled. Explorers planted flags and crosses in ceremonies of possession. Chronicles described non-Christian peoples as savages or barbarians, justifying domination through language. Even art and sermons reinforced the idea that expansion was God's plan. If language, ritual, and law all speak with one voice, who can stand against it? By the 1600s, colonies in North America inherited this worldview. When the United States was founded, it did not abandon the Doctrine of Discovery, it absorbed it. In 1823, the Supreme Court case Johnson versus Mintosh made it explicit. Chief Justice John Marshall ruled that indigenous nations could occupy their homelands, but did not own them. Only the government held title because Europeans had discovered the land centuries earlier. If America's highest court built its authority on this doctrine, was white supremacy written into U.S. law from the very beginning? And it wasn't the last time. In Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in 1831, the court described native tribes as domestic dependent nations, denying them true sovereignty. In Tehittan versus United States in 1955, the court once again relied on the doctrine, ruling that indigenous peoples had no legal claim to land unless the government granted it. A law written in Latin in the 1400s was still shaping American land rights 5 centuries later. If a 500-year-old decree can still decide who owns land, has the doctrine ever really ended? Of course, not everyone accepted conquest passively. Indigenous nations fought back, from the Taino in the Caribbean to the Powhatan Confederacy in Virginia, from the Mapuche in South America to countless others. Enslaved Africans resisted bondage in uprisings across plantations and aboard ships. But under the doctrine, their resistance was reframed as rebellion, their sovereignty erased. If defending your homeland makes you a criminal, then who gets to define justice? Meanwhile, the economic machine built on this doctrine transformed the world. Enslaved labor produced sugar, cotton, and tobacco, commodities that built empires. European banks financed voyages. Insurers profited from slavery ships. Governments taxed the trade. Whiteness wasn't just a cultural privilege. It became an economic one. If entire economies rest on stolen land and stolen labor, what would happen if that foundation were ever acknowledged fully? The doctrine's shadow extends even into the modern era. In the 20th century, it underpinned arguments about colonial control in Africa and Asia. In the 21st century, indigenous nations in North America, New Zealand, and Australia still confront its legacy in land disputes. In 2023, the Vatican formally repudiated the Doctrine of Discovery, centuries after it was first written. Yet repudiation doesn't erase the laws, the court rulings, and the structures still in place. If the Church itself now rejects the doctrine, should the legal systems built on it do the same? The Doctrine of Discovery is more than a medieval footnote. It is the launchpad of modern supremacy, the legal spine of conquest, slavery, segregation, and hierarchy. It shows us that supremacy isn't random. It is written, it is codified, and it adapts to survive. The birth of white supremacy wasn't sudden, it was deliberate. First framed as faith, then hardened into race, and eventually embedded as a global system. The Doctrine of Discovery proves that supremacy is not an accident of history. It is constructed, defended, and designed to endure. Follow the evidence. Study the system. Subscribe now. Supremacy Files, Power, Order, and Control.